Hey folks, Steve here with a very special video for you today. This is the introduction video or the beginning of a new playthrough series, which will be featuring for the first time on the channel the Library of Napoleonic Battles from OSG. This is a series that I've been quietly accruing games in the background of my life, and with the table cleared, it made sense to go ahead and to dive into one of these games and get a feel for the system, which is still fairly new to me, but doesn't seem to be terribly complex. Now, the one funny thing is, because this is just the way that I am, while I could have picked any number of games in the series to start off with, there are plenty that are maybe worthwhile as beginner games or first game in the series, even ones that have come out recently with the naming of Bonaparte, Bonaparte overruns Piedmont or Bonaparte in the Quadrilateral. Instead, I decided to be just even more uh, goofy here, and I am setting up here the uh, Battle of Fleurus. And I'm sure I'm going to butcher French names all over the place with this stuff, guys. Just be ready for it. I'm so sorry. But yes, this is actually a expansion battle. So just to show here, Fleurus 1794. So this is technically the earliest battle in the chronology of the time period that this particular series covers. So all the way back to 1794. I guess they could go even earlier to 1792 at some point. But you can see it's these battles in the year 1794, which is during the War of the First Coalition still. So this is a Republican France versus the monarchies of Europe. And in this case, it's largely a battle of the French versus the Austrians with some Dutch and potentially some British. Now, to kind of fill you in on like, oh, it's an expansion. So what all does that really mean, Steve? Well, as it happens, this is an expansion technically for one of the more well-known entries in this series, which is Napoleon's Last Gamble, which is really the latest version of Napoleon's Last Battles, all the different variations of this rule set. The latest here version of all that is Napoleon's Last Gamble, which has the big famous battles that are at the end of the Napoleonic time period during the War of the Seventh Coalition or the Battles of the 100 Days, depending on how you want to look at that. So this game has those battles. This game also has, if maybe not only because of its popularity, multiple expansions. Cover very briefly what those look like. There is Highway to Brussels. This is the expansion kit 1. It adds some extending maps and some additional stuff. And then there's also the roads to Hall, and more maps, more stuff, alternate routes to Brussels, all sorts of fun stuff. So um, when you look at all of that, right, this game gets bigger and bigger with every expansion, um, with maybe the exception of this one. So again, is expansion module for Napoleon's Last Gamble. The reason why this is set up the way that it is that these battles took place not too terribly far from where Waterloo occurred. And in fact, to play scenarios from this module, you need and we'll just talk about the scenario that I have set up here. You need the South map from Napoleon's Last Gamble, and then you need the South expansion map from Highway to Brussels. And so it is functionally, I guess a second tier expansion. You need the base game and one of the expansions to play this expansion, which kind of makes it a really weird scenario or set of battles to play, period, just because, you have to have these specific requirements to play the game. But I happen to have those. So it made sense to me to start in the early part of the chronology, and I've got it all set up here. I will make mention of something that I pulled in from another game, which is the game comes with demoralization markers for most of the formations in the game, However, there are not demoralization markers for the five Austrian formations, but Le Patrie en Danger, which is a game in the series that covers sort of the end of the War of the Sixth Coalition and the invasion of France, has these markers in the same graphical style as the ones for this expansion, and the colors match and the designations match. So I grabbed those from the other game. I specifically punched these five counters, rounded them, and I'll put them back in that other game box when I'm done with this. Um, so kind of a weird thing. You don't have to use the demoralization markers. There are other ways to do that per the rule book. But I managed to have the right counters to make it easier on me at the table. So all good for that. If you're not familiar with this series, it is, I guess, splitting some line between tactical battle and operational Napoleonics. So it is at a scale where, depending on what scenarios you're playing, you're often playing a campaign or an approach to battle. We've sort of seen approaches like that in some other games I've covered on the channel. This series, holistically, really has an old lineage, but ultimately that's a factor here. So you can have approach to battle where there's a lot more maneuvering along the roads to find the site of the battle and to set up for it. And then you'll typically have the day of battle for various famous battles where the formations are kind of already set up in a very historical situation, and you're fighting out the battle across either a single day or possibly 2 days. I think it's a very good scale to operate at because, like some other games of a similar scale, you still get the fight. You still fight the battle, but all the additional constraints or circumstances around the battle, why did the things end up the way they did, you get a much better look at that, and I do find that that is a pretty neat element of it. So I'm expecting to have a good time with this game, but I've got to throw out a couple of caveats to this. One, this game series is supported by optional cards. These are cards that the players can get, they can play, that allows them to do certain things. It modifies movement rates when you play a particular card. There's all sorts of things here. This is just one of the decks, one of the deck of cards. I am choosing to not use these cards, at least for this playthrough, at least for this battle, because the system is still new to me. I feel like the cards are going to add extra stuff that could just distract me from focusing on playing the game correctly the first time around with just the base rules. So we won't be using the cards. That means there are certain mechanics like calling for a general retreat and alternate reinforcements that happen a bit differently than if you were playing with the cards, and they're more based around die rolls. That's okay with me. The other thing I should mention is that when you're playing this game opposed, you tend to have hidden units and somewhat hidden movement because you don't know exactly what units are where as you're moving your stuff around. I do actually have the counter sleds that OSG sells that can be helpful in playing this game with hidden movement, where you set up your units on the sleds and then your opponent can't see your stuff as you're moving it. They are neat, but I'm just playing it solitaire, so there's really no point in me using them. And technically, I could use other types of markers to cover up my stacks and try to trick myself into not remembering how strong units are and where is what, and who is where and what and how. I'm not gonna do that. I just, as a solitaire exercise, I simply can't operate with very much hidden information. So there's going to be certain elements of the gameplay here, and in fact, certain mechanics that make for very interesting play, especially this scenario, because it involves a observation balloon, which is very exciting. But technically, for me, that observation balloon might as well be there only for flavor, as my observing units and seeing hidden units and all of that really won't come into play. So what you'll see as I play through this over the course of the videos will not match perfectly to what you might get in an opposed game. That's just part of the reality of it. I do know people that would play this with me, so I have it, a reasonable expectation that I'll be able to play this in person in the future, just not for this one, and I can get the rules underneath me to a certain degree. The other thing that's important, that is kind of a difference, is because of the lack of hidden markers and all that, hidden units, the technique of breaking down cavalry units into vedettes is something I may not really do much of. So the vedettes are basically weak non-combat scout units. Here's some examples where you can split up a light cavalry unit or some cavalry unit. You get these instead. They can run around the map. They can form back up into the parent unit. But largely for the most part, these units are best used as scouts, to spot, what units your enemy has and where, to screen your forces and all that kind of stuff. So they might still be useful as screens, um, so that they can retreat before battle and kind of slow down the enemy. But I'm less probably likely to use them than if we were playing with hidden movement and I was playing this opposed. So something else to watch out for. There's still a reason for me to try to use them, just not as much in other circumstances. So that's a lot of caveats to me just playing a game, but this game probably shines best, and the series probably shines best in an opposed fashion where you're operating under that sort of hidden information stuff and that fog of war. Here we're going to have less fog of war, but we won't know what the dice are really going to do. And the point for me really is just to get a good feel for the system and movement and combat and technique, and managing the terrain and all of that other good stuff. Um, there is an elephant in the room that I'm going to knock out right away, before somebody hopefully has even said anything in the comments. If you leave comments before watching the whole video, sometimes I address the things you talk about before you get there. I do not care that there are other rules to this system. I do not care. I know there are people who believe the combat system to not be bloody enough, and so they run to alternative rule systems that they prefer. That is great. That's peachy keen. I don't care. I just don't care. This is the game that the designer intended. I generally agree with his perspective on at what degree of abstraction are you showing things. And just because there's not a bunch of like dead units in a dead pile somewhere doesn't mean that men fighting on the battlefield haven't died or become injured. It's just what you're representing with a counter means something, and if you think it means something else, and that's not what the designer intended, only you can be disappointed by yourself based on the expectations that you set on a game. So yes, there's other rule systems that will make a CRT that causes step losses. This game doesn't have a lot of step losses. There are certainly ways that step losses will occur. It's more about the positioning and creating circumstances where a force is flanked and disrupting that force such that it can no longer operate effectively. That there's a lot of things with this design that are still in the framework of how Napoleonic battles worked. It's just you're not seeing the death count, and nor should you be too worried about it. With the idea that, and this is this way even for like World War II games or any other hex and counter game, that counter represents a force. It doesn't mean that everybody is in a square inside a hexagon, and it doesn't mean that all those guys are in a hexagon plus the zone of control around that hexagon and other hexagons. At some degree, there's just things that you can't capture with cardboard chits. It's simply a facet of needing to have something on a board that represents your ability to project force and in combat capability, and that's what the counter does. So that's the last I'm going to speak on it. And if you disagree, I do not care. Play it the way you want to play it. That's fine. We're going to play the rules as they are provided by OSG, and that's good enough for me. If I get to the end of this game series and I think differently, I'll call attention to that. Maybe I'll do a dedicated video if I change my mind. So it's clear that I would have changed my mind, but right now I'm not too terribly worried about it. Um, so as part of the intro, I want to hit some really basic things. I've got everything set up kind of the way I want. I've got the units set up. I have a few non-game counters here sitting on hexes that are normally victory point hexes in the Napoleon's Last Gamble scenarios, because certain hexes don't count for victory points in the Battle of Fleurus. God, I'm gonna have trouble, guys. I'm just putting these markers here. These are not, those four hexes, um, here, 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 and here, are not victory point hexes. There are other victory point hexes, here, here, and then there are a few down along the river line that the French are going to hope to hold. I've got my sequence of play up there in the upper right. I have the turn track in the glare right here, along with other sort of counters we're not necessarily using right this second. We also have the casualty record track, which will keep track of, for a particular formation, how many strength points have been lost to determine demoralization and all that good fun stuff. I have over to the left the recovery holding boxes and the other CRT player aids over there. And I've got the various the rule book for the system, the setup cards, the playbook for this expansion, all off on the other side of the table, and we'll lean on that stuff as we go. If you're going to look to play this, keep in mind, yeah, you got to grab some of the player aid cards that are for Napoleon's Last Gamble, in addition to the playbook and various things, the counter sheet for Fleurus. So that maybe should go without saying, but just, it took me a little bit to get everything set up because I didn't realize what I needed to have. I didn't realize, yeah, there is a sequence of play card. I'm just not looking in the right place. Let me go dig in the Last Gamble box. Okay, here's those holding cards. Here's casualty track. I have to use the casualty tracks and the turn record tracks that are specifically for Fleurus and not for any of the Last Gamble battles. So it took me a little bit to get everything organized just the way that I wanted it. And so something to keep in mind if you're going to do the same. The rules are in print 7.35, but I do know that on the OSG website, the rules PDF actually says 7.36. I did run through to find out like what's different, and there's not much here. And my printer sucks, so I lost some of the text, but officers can roll initiative to move themselves. A repulse attack may not require, if you fail a repulse, you don't necessarily have to attack in the same combat phase if the terrain keeps you from attacking. I'm not sure how often that comes up. And then a couple other minor things. It's really just more clarifications than anything. So don't feel too bad if you're looking to go play the system and all you have in print is the 7.35 rules. It is generally the same as 7.36. So depending on how you prefer your PDF versus your print, that's all fine and good. I assume 7.36 will be the rule book that will be printed and used whenever the next game comes out in the series next year. Let's take a look a little bit at the map. So it's something to be said about this series. The maps are always beautiful. They are really just amazing to look at, and they're very neat, and the terrain looks cool, and it all just looks very, very good. I will say the one challenge that I have, and it's not necessarily a criticism, just something I'm dealing with, is I look at the slopes, and sometimes I have a hard time understanding what the lay of the land is really like. So here, like, okay, clearly forest, easy, rivers, okay, towns, roads, trails, all that. With the crests, and even when you talk about like hills or plateaus, I had to really train my brain to look at this and go, okay, where the shadow is or where the darker outline of something is demarks the hill. So if you're going up a slope, you're going up a hill, that shading gets darker. And so the crest is along these hex sides. And if you're looking down the crest, it's down like this. The crest maybe is easy to adjudicate because it's a hex side, but then you start getting into some tougher ways of interpreting this stuff. And just to show an example of that, let's see if I can find the right example that makes the most sense to show. Over here, you can see like this is a hilltop here. It's two hexes of a hill basically. And you would go down the slope or down the hill to get into this hex. And technically, this hex right here is between the hill and then a crest right there. I think I'm interpreting that correctly, and someone may need to tell me I'm wrong on that. But the shading makes it a little tough. Like it does weird things to my eyes where I'm like, okay, is it actually lower topography or is it higher topography? And so I think that's the right way to look at it, especially where it's like, okay, this is clearly white crest, uh, colorization and graphics, and then the shadow is the darker shading. Your shadow, which is its most prevalent at the sort of the dip of not the dip, but the beginning of the incline, or where the incline is to the top of the crest or the top of the hill. I'm going to have to really train my brain on that. This map isn't so bad, just in the big scheme of things. There are certainly maps, I think, like the Piedmont map looks a lot crazier because that's much more mountainous. Here, generally, we're dealing with the woods, and then there's a lot more flat terrain, kind of broken up by crests. So that's if you were to try to characterize the terrain of this map, plenty of forest with streams and rivers and stuff, with some marshes, with the streams, and then again there's a lot of areas over here that are flat, and there are crests throughout, and that will be a common terrain feature as we're operating, that we will likely come across crests somewhere. That's just part of it. It's going to happen, so it goes. In terms of the actual battle itself, historically, what happened is that the Austrians and the Dutch pressed on the French. The French kind of retracted back this way, in a defensive kind of concavity there. Um, Defensive arc, maybe is the right way to say it. And eventually, the Austrians kind of ran out of gas and were willing to back off, retaking Charleroi, and left basically. And eventually, this would see the French, move on past this immediate battle to capture the Austrian Netherlands. So, technically, that puts the French on the defensive, more or less. And in fact, the Austrian, the coalition player, will get to go first. The one thing I put out here to remind myself, there are Dutch reinforcements that come in right here, and like right here. They'll eventually come on over, which will leave the French left wing over here struggling against them. So I have to like that's there as a mnemonic to remind myself. Like even when the French go, I can't just assume that edge of the map is safe. It's really not. And so the French have their left wing. They have a reserve right here. They have a center right there. They've got an advance guard over here near their right wing. And that is the French forces allotted for this scenario, not counting the reinforcements that may trickle in. And then for the coalition, I mentioned the Dutch that are going to come in from the west. You have the Australian second column, third column, fourth column, and then 5th column over to the east, and that's kind of the extent that we would expect to see. There's a possibility to see some British and Hanoverian units possibly coming in via alternate reinforcements. It's not guaranteed that they'll come in. And the French basically have a couple of things to their advantage. They have some improved position markers here that support the defense. They kind of can back up if they don't want to move forward into some of the woods, which has varying costs to it. But it also hurts their artillery capability. And as I'm getting a feel for things, I can see like, okay, there's a commander who is Jourdan, if I'm pronouncing that right, and ultimately the different formations are only a handful of units, right? 5 to 6 units max, maybe for a formation to operate with, and while they're kind of co-located for that formation nearby, there are some pretty big gaps between the formations. So whether or not there's good opportunities for trying to penetrate lines, I'm unsure of. A lot of things that are kind of unknown to me on how all this is going to work. I do want to look at where I have the baggage trains set up. I'm not sure how important the baggage trains will really be for this scenario, because I guess you only check supply so often, so it may not really make sense to have the baggage trains very far up. They should maybe be as far back as possible for our supply lines, so I'll need to look at that as well. But generally, this should be an interesting run. In terms of command, that's going to be a big thing that matters. Basically, your overall commander can trace a line of 4 hexes to officers under their command, and those formations can be in command by that. So Jourdan is here. The center, the reserve and the center can easily be put into command using the command points of Jourdan, which is 2. So he can for sure make sure these 2 formations are in command and can operate. Unfortunately, our left wing commander, Kleber, has a really crappy initiative rating or command rating. So I'm going to have to look at this. He might actually be a commander officer, in which case he should be able to activate the left wing. Never mind what I'm saying, guys. I believe the left wing can activate, or be in command rather, fairly easily because of the officer commander type that these leaders appear to be, or at least some of them appear to be. I'm gonna struggle with some of this. Might be errata on the counter, but that's going to be worth looking at. And then these guys over here, the advance guard and the right wing, appear to just be officers and not be commander officers. And they're going to require basically an initiative die roll. Lefebvre is a 4, Marceau is a 3, so that's only our advance guard will probably be able to be in command. Our right wing may not be in command right away, which could be a challenge. It's going to be interesting to see how that all kind of works together. Similarly, for the Austrians, there are 2 formations, the 2nd column and the 3rd column, that will likely be able to be in command just from the get-go easily enough. And then the matching analogs here of the 4th column and 5th column opposing French formations there have the same initiative rating. So I guess it's fair. All the formations on the board should roughly have the same chances of being in command and being able to operate at full capability. If you're out of command, there's certain restrictions on what you can do. So we do generally want our units to be in command. The day of battle scenario basically runs from 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. So it's a whole day of fighting. "15 turns. So each side's going to get to go 15 times, basically. unless we reach some kind of like crazy situation where it's worth calling the scenario. So that's a fair amount of game time, and I certainly don't think we're going to play every second of it on the recording camera. Um, but 15 turns, each side gets to go and do their thing. That's a sizable amount of gaming, and that feels like a good place to start. If I have a really good time with this, I may look at trying to do the campaign for this expansion, which means it's a multi-day affair. I'm not sure what that's really going to look like. I'm not exactly sure if that's what I want to do. The battles may be, filling enough for me, but we'll see what happens. So, yeah, guys, this is just the intro, introducing what we're doing, what we're looking at. I've got everything set up, so we're going to be getting into it. I expect to be able to get started here in the pretty near future. I'm not sure how much I'll get to game over the weekend, but we'll see what happens. But we're off to a new adventure here, guys, um, and well, I'm looking forward to it. I like Napoleonics. I like strategic Napoleonic stuff, as you guys know. The battle stuff, I think this is my real opportunity to get a bit deeper into that realm where it's not commands and colors. And hey, commands and colors is fun, but not quite the fidelity that something like this game can provide with the beautiful maps and the mechanics and everything else. I did find that the rule book has been really easy to read and understand for the most part. I just need to see everything operating together for it to really click, and I suspect that'll be easy, especially easy coming off OCS, which is the last thing I just played. So anyway, thanks for watching, guys. Hope this is good as the sort of onboarding video for the next series. We'll see you in the next one for turn one, where the Austrians, the coalition, will get things started off first. And until then, take care, guys. Keep gaming.